it was very rare if I wanted to stop, but if I felt like stopping or had writer's block, I would just write about that. And then there I was writing again,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Always reliable.
I don't know what to write. I have writer's block, or everything stinks, or whatever. Then all of a sudden it starts to flow. Maybe it's like dirty water, but then it becomes, ooh, that's kind of something. Sometimes first thought is best, and sometimes you want to edit it, And yeah, it's just what I do. I can't not do it.
What would you say to those people who do feel like giving up on their creative outlets?
You can't do it. It's like, it's needed. Like every single person's voice is needed so much. And that soulfulness in our world today, think about it, we're getting bombarded by propaganda and media and information overload, and just a human, real, soulful voice in that is just huge. It's like, you see the movie It's a Wonderful Life during Christmas. You had a lot of hard times, but you think about like the 50 people in life. It doesn't have to be with the TV and all this. It's just, your voice is so necessary. And then if it's a loving voice, think of how that reforms ourself and reforms our world. But a lot of times it becomes something a lot bigger than we think. A simple act of kindness, to me, it becomes like a lot of the best moments of my life so far. But an example that I use, which, God bless you. That was my fiance sneeze. Very special sneeze.
Yes.
She's actually a talented opera singer, and she was injured, but she was in a band called Makino, which wonderful, very talented. But what I wanted to say was, for example, my friend from the Alarm got cancer, and his wife got cancer, so they formed an organization, Love, Hope, Strength, to help other people with cancer. So now he performed with me at Lollapalooza for the first time in '95 as my guest, and Allen Ginsberg came. I didn't know he came to the New York Randall's Island, but I hung out with him a couple of days later. Amira Baraka, Leroy Jones, the beat poet over there, and we were talking. So he ended up letting me sample from Hal, and he had turned down like Paul McCartney and Beck. He thought Beck was a genius, and which he is. And I had a song with Mike Peters. So years later, I wanted to give back to him because him and his wife had cancer, and they were doing a recording. So I went to the Eroding a couple of years ago at the jazz club in Manhattan. I went backstage, and he wanted to write something. He was helping people that are fighting cancer, Love, Hope, Strength organization, lovehopestrength.org. And what happened, he wanted to have the piece written about peace between Muslim, Christians, and Jews. And I was out of work. I had been a manager at AMC. I was going up to the ladder with News 12 and AMC. And I was out of work, and I was like, oh, boy. I took a trip to, I didn't know what I was going to do. I took a trip to England, and I went to a peace protest at John Lennon's birth house, and I started writing a poem. And it was called A Protest of All Future Wars Before They Begin. And then I went to Liverpool, and I was in the Cavern Club, and I'm writing a poem.
Wow.
And then I went and I spent some time with Dave Sharper, the Alarm, at his home in Manchester. And I wrote this poem. I came back. Now, the other guy from the Alarm, they didn't talk, has this project. So I recite this poem. Maybe you could use 30 seconds. It's a 6-minute poem on peace. It happens to be you doing this recording, so I just wanted to give it to my friend. Long story, kind of shorter. He ended up using it almost like an opera to like usher in different parts of what was now the world's longest officially released song. And I got a Guinness Book of World Records. I got a Guinness record. So it's more had to do with him than me. But it's a good example of like a simple act of kindness. And now it's like when I was a kid, I would read the Guinness Book of World Records. It really what does it really mean in a way? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like it's more your character, which is your soul. That's love. But in a way, it shows that it turned into something great, and you really don't know until you're in emotion. So if you're someone that's thinking of giving up, don't do it. Your voice is needed. There's only one you. Your potential is so unique. And then even if it's just in reforming yourself or your family, now you, instead of being alienated, that's coming back to the community. So it's like I always tell the kids, all words if nothing else, remember, our words can create or destroy. We can build someone up or tear them down. So like in junior high, I grew 3 inches. I had some pimples. I was on the football team, and it was like, and people are making fun, and but I'm like, but like, what about when you use, or girls will make fun of other girls' clothes or whatever, and sometimes it's a male bonding thing, but sometimes it's very cruel. But there are times in life, maybe it's like a teacher spirit, where I've seen something in someone. You're a good listener. Maybe you could be like a counselor, or like a friend of mine was kind of violent, but you write really well, and all our friends are musicians. So then he was in a heavy metal band, and then he wrote poetry, and it's like sometimes people don't tell them. People might not know they have certain qualities, but it becomes like their whole life work sometimes if you don't always look at the negative and you look at what about all the positive things about that person, and then that grows, and then community, we're all stronger for it,
Now, how was your second book, Strobe Light Generation, different from the first one?
So now that was 2006, so there was quite a bit of time. Like I had 8 CDs, but there's a lot of time in between those books. So now it was a different time period. Now the internet, early on, a friend of mine was on the internet early on, and I had invited him. I put him on the guest list at something I did at one of the hotels, like the BAB was doing or something. And it turned out he was a poet philosopher, and he built websites, so he built me a website. And by this point, that book was self-published. There was the whole print-on-demand thing and all this. Now, it would have been more marketable. I made it in the shape of a square because I felt like it was a gift. So I feel like that book, I'm very proud of that book, but it didn't get out there as much as the other one, because the other one, the shape and all this, and it was more in the bigger stores, but it was internet-based. And for the first time, you can get a bigger cut of the pie, because there were so many people in the pie with the first book. But being there were so many people in the pie, it sold more, And I had a nice event at the book review, and but I feel as if life, it's almost like I felt like I became an artist in that time period where, for example, the quotes on that book, Peter Garrett of Midnight Oil encouraged me. Larry Norman, who was considered the father of Christian rock, they just did a big write-up on him in the New Yorker. He had offered me a record deal, but his health had failed. When he went to go see Bono in Ireland to talk about me, first of all, I had, for the Strobe Light Generation, a big publisher was looking at it in 2004. September 11th happened. Larry went to go see Bono. Bono's dad died that day. He flew to an island. He spent time with Bono's pastor, Bono of U2. Then Larry had a heart attack. So I was trying to help him instead of him helping me. So it wasn't meant to be. Like, just like with Ginsberg had passed away shortly after we collaborated. So sometimes timing, as a matter of fact, I feel like timing is with me, like, usually right now. But in that time period, it's weird because, like, it was like treasure to me, the time I spent with Larry Norman when I had left the TV business and I was a full-time poet after my first CD into the 21st Century with Mike Peters from The Alarm. It was treasure that time. But things kind of caved into and were hard financially and that kind of thing. But the Strobe Light Generation, now Daniel Berrigan, the legendary poet. So now it wasn't just Allen Ginsberg. Now it was the legendary poet Daniel Berrigan, who also was a Jesuit priest who did the first Vietnam protest, and they prayed. And unfortunately, he got arrested because it was the first draft, burning of the draft cards and stuff like this. But he was an amazing poet. He wrote a quote for my new book. And then Peter Garrett, who made me very aware of, about environmental things. And I loved Midnight Oil. And he was such a real friend to me, especially as I was a single dad to my son Zion. He was one of the few people encouraging me. And he was the Australian minister, of arts and education, in Australia. And so at that point, having a son, I couldn't always show up, but I feel like I did some cool things I'm proud of. And that book I'm proud of artistically, but it was, to me, it was a gift, but it wasn't as marketable or something like that. But you can get it to people directly because it was print on demand. So now I had the experience of the biggest distributor, Ingram, and then internet and starting to go internationally and stuff like that. But then I had the experience of, different artists, maybe like I have a Prince T-shirt on, like Prince would, now different people were trying to go directly to their audience, like Mike from The Alarm did that, and so that's pretty much the story of Strobe Light Generation. And the story, the thought behind it is, actually, I got the idea when I was on stage at Lollapalooza in '95 when I was with Mike Peters from The Alarm and Allen Ginsberg was there, and I didn't realize it, but I had invited him. And I was like, Allen Ginsberg was the Beat Generation, but I'm declaring this the Strobe Light Generation into the 21st century. And I was like, oh boy, Mike, I think that was like pompous. And he's like, no, that was great. Go for it, Billy. And he was like, you should make an album or a band, the Strobe Light Generation. And I was like, but to me, it was like, now we were becoming this soundbite kind of culture. Like a strobe light. It's not particularly healthy for people to, like there was a poem, Microwave Romance. I love you from the bottom of my current frame of reference. Of course, in a few years, I could have a new preference. I love you, Microwave Romance. But not everything fast. I had a 45-minute poem, but I was realizing, oh boy, it's almost like Larry Norman trained me to speak in sound bites. I'm not doing that now, but that's the culture, and it's not healthy, in a way.
You have recorded lots of CDs, as you mentioned, and the last one you recorded was called Beyond Babylon. Can you elaborate?
Yes. Yeah, that was my last one, and it got a lot of notice from other artists, icon kind of people. But for me, it came about very organically. I just wrote what I could not write, and I recorded it for $50 in the studio. And I thought it was going to be for my son, because I was raising him as a single dad. His name was Zion, and we were living in Babylon. So Beyond Babylon, there's a psalm that says, by the waters of Babylon, I wept for Zion. So it was traveling through personal pain with joy, personal challenges with joy, and it was written for my son. But the interesting is I did a video blog. I was all excited down by the Babylon docks. And I mentioned all this, and a month later, the Hurricane Sandy devastated my hometown and other towns of Babylon. So it's like 4 or 5 years ago, whatever. And other friends had given me music and different things, and some of them like Burlap to Kashmir, Stephen DeLopoulos, they were, on Sony Music or big artists, and then legendary industrial guys like Black House, who he actually was like the first Christian industrial guy, but he would be like on 120 Minutes and stuff like this, and like just artists that I really loved. So some of them became guests on this thing that I had recited for my son. But the interesting thing is it became a voice for other people, because they were like, I was actually out of work because I was a temp manager during the Olympics for NBC, and I was out of work. So I was able to show up and lend a hand like a lot of people. But people started saying, aren't you the guy that was at the mall and did the book signings, or that was on MTV, or did this or that? I was like, yeah. So they said, hey, can you do in Lindenhurst tree lighting? Or there's times we even saved someone's life. Some, are pretty known, but I don't want anybody's privacy. So this poetry that was meant very personal became a voice for other people too, which is great, but who would ever have thought of that? But there was local town imagery. You asked before, did the local town influence me? But there was like, it was all there, like Marconi sending his first wireless message, which was from Babylon, and Argyle Park. There's a park that everybody goes to there, and these were all a part of the images, Bruce Springsteen, you might have Jersey images, or I've spent a lot of time in Manhattan. There might be Manhattan images, but that's very like where I grew up, in Babylon, that CD, and that was my last one. But that opened doors for my latest book, Words Ripped from a Soul Still Bleeding.
What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so now that I put my mind to it. Okay, I had the experience with Ingram, but then I had the experience with the self-publishing, and I'm like, what is this moment now? And I was very resistant. Like when I was changing diapers for my son, digital downloads I was with The Orchard because I was doing a lot of stuff in the East Village, and they were in the East Village, but they became huge in digital distribution. So what happened, my first CD, and then my Into the 21st Century, the one with Ginsberg and Mike Peters, but then Billy Lamont with the Peculiar People from 2004, like it started all going digital, and you don't get as big of a cut or whatever, but it was like spreading the word about my poetry because the company was growing, and I wasn't doing anything. Now with a book, I'm like, I decided I want it to be an organic. I want to have the Ingram distribution, but I want it to be accessible on the internet. But I think I want to go with